Hi there. I'm going to try and avoid talking too much over the game sound. I didn't set my recording levels properly and the game sound is really loud. But I had first impression of Elder Scrolls from the beta. This is not a review, by the way. Bad taste to review a beta, but since they're releasing in a couple of weeks, my impressions are valid and to take into account. And I enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun, got pretty addicted to it. I got dragged away to something else during the weekend and found myself jonesing to come back and play this again. I had a good time with the game. It does have some problems, it has some flaws, not surprisingly. It's at a beta stage at the moment. But I did get a big kick out of it. The biggest problem is the economy. You'll notice that if you start to play and they haven't changed the way the economy works. You buy things for about 20 times the price that you sell them for. This is the only other MMO I've ever played is Star Wars: The Old Republic, and I'd say that the economy is similar in that everything is ridiculously expensive, and you can't sell much of anything for anything. Everything you sell is incredibly cheap, or you don't get much money for it. The character generator is great. You can adjust height. You don't get that option very often. I'm using a Knight Blade, a rogue character, basically. Obviously, I've gone with dual-wielding daggers. It was a bit tricky to figure out how to play the game, but then again, there's not exactly a strong tutorial yet. I would recommend that they work on tutorial stuff before launching. Give players some sense of what it is they're supposed to do. This was actually a very hard mission, by the way. Up until now, I hadn't died very often. I died a couple of times right at the beginning. I didn't have too many problems during the bulk of my time leveling up from about 2 to 7. And then suddenly I found myself fighting a bunch of vampires, and as you can see, they're all over the place. And I think I died. Maybe not. Elves are good looking again. If that was one of the things about Elder Scrolls that had bothered you about Skyrim, they gave Oblivion had not so nice looking elves. Everything was incredibly angular. Morrowind. And then Oblivion actually had nice-looking elves that were relatively human-looking, and then they put the angular ones back in for Skyrim, and not everybody was happy about that. If you like the pretty elves, or the human-looking elves, that's what they put down for Elder Scrolls. So in Elder Scrolls, most of the elves don't have the sort of highly angular faces of the previous versions. This is just a human. I'm playing a Breton. My theory was Bretons were sort of overpowered in Skyrim because of magic resistance, but they've changed enough of the class skills that they're not quite the The game looks fairly nice. It looked nicer than I expected it to, but I should mention as early as possible that these are on the lowest graphics settings. I'm playing this on a laptop. Granted, the laptop's only about a year and a half old, but even so, it is definitely obsolete for playing this game. It can handle the game on the lowest setting, and I found it reasonable. I'd imagine it looks pretty good on the high settings, but you'd need a good machine for that.
Well done. I am Shalador, young one, and I think you'll do nicely.
I mentioned earlier that the only other MMO I've played is the Star Wars Old Republic one. I do enjoy that one. This does not have the kind of story and character that does. You don't get a lot of story and character out of this one. As with most Elder Scrolls games, the NPCs are fairly bare bones. There is some good voice acting with some of them, and some of them have a bit of a personality and are kind of fun to talk to, but for the most part, it's very dry. Go here, get this. Go there, do that. And I think I died right now. Yeah, I'm not going to get out of this. Vampires are nasty. Probably not a good idea to try fighting them. There wasn't a lot of inherently co-op encouraging material. Actually, that is one of the criticisms. I should probably mention, I don't plan on subscribing for this. I was impressed enough from playing it that I decided I probably would spend $60 on it. But that's about as far as I'd go. I would spend the $60, but I wouldn't subscribe to this. It doesn't. There's not enough material here. Ultimately, that's my issue with it. The rest is all manageable, but there's very little material. I hope they have a lot more planned, and I hope that they'll be adding a lot of material as they go. But at the moment, I traveled between essentially the only 3 areas I had access to, and what I found pretty quickly was there were really only about 3 or 4 missions per area, and that's about it. And there are a few side missions that you'll get, like they'll send you off to another location, and while you're traveling to that location, each area might have 1, maybe on occasion 2 sort of submissions to that sort of region of the landscape in between towns, but that's about it. And so I think I'd probably done a grand total of about maybe 15 or 16 missions over the course of about 15 or 16 hours of play, basically. And I had essentially exhausted all the missions in the area. I was unable to finish most of those missions because they were very, they're broken, essentially. There's a lot of broken missions in this game. That'll all be worked on before it's released, I'm sure. And it doesn't look like the broken missions are complicated in the nature and the way they are broken. It seems as though everybody's standing around waiting for a particular character to activate, kind of thing. So I don't think we're talking about extensive coding time to get the missions fixed. So I think those will be fine by the time that they release. So I'm not criticizing them for the missions being broken. This is just a beta, but I am criticizing them for there really aren't very many of them. There's just not a lot of missions to do. For the most part, the mechanics still work the same. You've got stamina, mana, and health, and they are essentially your fuel for running, fighting, casting spells, and, living, respectively. Crafting has changed and will take a bit of figuring out. I managed to get crafting largely figured out. It's highly unfriendly to new players as opposed to in Skyrim. In Skyrim, crafting was very easy for new players to figure out, quite frankly. I found it very easy to figure out the crafting in Skyrim, and it was very easy to become effective at crafting very early for your level. In fact, it was very easy to use crafting to level. But in this game, it's somewhat more complicated. A new player can't walk out the gate and start crafting things. It takes quite a while to collect the necessary resources to get into crafting. And crafting itself is actually more complicated than it is in Skyrim and other games. You now have more options, though, which is kind of interesting. You can make armor of particular styles, which is cool, which allows you to... I think have a greater... ultimately, there will be a greater ability to customize the combination of armor's appearance and powers.
Yes, just like
I think. I could be wrong about that. I'm just basically standing around waiting for a mission to activate here. You have to wait for these guys to finish.
She's alive. That's all that matters. Take her to quarantine.
I prefer the combat in this to Star Wars The Old Republic. Star Wars The Old Republic has a very, very complicated combat system, or at least I found it very complicated. And I found that with only one, I'm a free-to-play player on
my 4th day without sleep.
Are you feeling well? It was very, very hard to navigate combat. It tended to involve a lot of complexity. This is simpler, and for that I actually appreciate the simpler style of combat for this one. And it is actually better combat than in Skyrim. There you can do slightly more complicated things, and more interesting, I find, than in Skyrim combat. But that having been said, it's very repetitive. Areas tend to have a small variety of enemies in them. In fact, I think there were really only about 5 different kinds of enemies during the entire time.
The workings are still down there.
Certainly in broad categories there were only about 5 different kinds. I suppose there were subversions. But it gets a little boring to fight the same things over and over and over again. So one area, for example, might have Owlet in it, and that's all you will fight. It's just different, lizard-faced dudes. And that's it. And then some other area might have thunderbugs, and that's all you'll fight in that area is thunderbugs. So hopefully they'll get a little bit more variety in the wildlife and the enemies as you go along. There are dogs in the game, and oh my god, you can't have one as a pet, but fix that. Fix that. Get on that, guys. Make dogs available as pets. Oh my god, you'll make so much money. When I saw it, the first time I saw a dog, I practically started throwing money at the screen to try and make him my pet. It didn't work. I didn't even realize it. I think I played the game for about a good 8 hours before I realized that I actually had a bunch of pets that I could use. I ran around with a monkey for a while, and then I switched to a little hopping lizard thing. They're purely cosmetic as far as I know. I did have some frame rate problems. My laptop was not powerful enough to run the tutorial for this game. The tutorial takes place in the Oblivion dimension, and I think they were enclosed areas, so I would have thought the frame rate would have worked better. I figured the open areas would cause more problems for my processor, but it actually turns out that Oblivion's combination of flame effects and background animations really put my processor to work, and the game was almost crippled during the tutorial, and I barely actually got the regular game started. Once I was actually out in the open areas, my frame rate actually stabilized quite a bit. You're noticing some frame rate problems here, more than likely, a little bit of skipping and hitching here and there, but that's because I have fraps running at the same time as the game. I actually had to quit out of the game in order to load fraps in. It wasn't possible to window the game, which is probably by design. But once Frap was running in the background and I was able to get the hotkey going, I was able to record a bit of gameplay. I just didn't realize until late in the process I should probably do this. Sneaking doesn't have an associated skill anymore, so I'm not 100% sure how it works now. I don't know if you technically get better at it. That's one of the problems with the game right there, actually. There are some bugs, but I think most of them are just like visual glitchy things, little things that aren't worth mentioning in a video of gameplay footage, except for one, which is the one you just saw right there, which is actually quite a pervasive one, and that's something that I really hope they work on. The hit detection is pretty bad with melee weapons, so you can see that I was standing right next to a guy and did a big heavy attack on him, and it passed harmlessly through him without doing any damage, and that happens a lot. And it's an altitude issue. It did not take me long to figure that out. You have to be perfectly level with your opponent. If you are slightly below your melee attack will stop working. Which is obviously not a good thing when you have variable terrain, and in a game like this, terrain is inherently variable. It's not a big flat landscape. So they're going to have to fix the hit detection on melee. It was a consistent problem, and probably was responsible for about half of my deaths. For the most part, the quests take the fairly simple and direct nature that fetch quests usually do. Go here, kill that person, come back, or go here, get this thing, bring it there. There are some exceptions. There are some kind of interesting missions involving the Queen. I think there were only a handful of areas that were actually unlocked for the beta. I had the impression that we were all in the same areas, same 2 or 3 areas, and that no one could really travel anywhere else. I could be wrong about that. They might have opened up other ones. I wasn't able to leave and go to any new areas other than 2 specific ones. One of which is the Aldmeri, I think is what it's called. And there were some interesting missions when working for the Queen of the Aldmeri. I don't want to ruin anything with spoilers, even though I'm showing you footage of some of these missions, but they were slightly more complex than your average
I'm sorry, my
Elder Scrolls mission. You know, it wasn't just a direct fetch quest. It actually got a little bit. There was some intrigue. It actually got interesting. It was not implemented great though, because the characters still have this sort of. They do feel a little bit like pegs, like they're just there to fill a role, and that's it. They don't have much personality. And I don't know to what extent that's going to change, because that's always been a character of Elder Scrolls. The NPCs are not filled with personality. You don't spend significant amounts of time making choices in conversations. Conversations are fairly dry. Get from A to B so that we can move on to the next part of the plot affairs, and that stays true in the Elder Scrolls Online. There's not much there's not much role-playing satisfaction to be gained from this. This is more of an action role-playing thing. I suppose role-playing may come into it when playing with other people. I was basically soloing. I mean, as far as I know, I was the only person that I knew playing this weekend. I suppose there might have been some other people on. We just didn't know each other's characters' names, and we probably could have tried to find each other or something. But I was basically playing by myself. There were a handful of opportunities to just sort of hook up with somebody who was standing nearby and fight something together, but I never actually. You can group up, but I never did. I just sort of ran around by myself. And the game is manageable that way. You don't need to be in a party. The vampire missions that you can see me doing now, I started to die a lot when I was in the vampire den that you saw earlier. But that was, other than that, that was the only part where I probably would have been better off with a couple of people helping me. You can revive fallen people, but you have to use soul gems to do it. I only ever found one soul gem the entire time I played.
Sorry, friend. This area is off limits.
Which leads me to believe that soul gems will be, by design, somewhat difficult to get your hands on. You'll have to be, I would imagine, a little bit more advanced and able to essentially use spells to create
Pendil's
yourself,
done so much for
or
this town.
forge
All I can
weapons
do
that
is
have the
trust
ability,
my
which
mother,
is what I'll probably
Donatus.
do.
She's
what
at
I
her
did in
home
Skyrim.
nearby, waiting for word about my brother.
So I really like the character creation options. I think that they offer the best variety that Elder Scrolls has so far offered. And I would play this game if it didn't have a subscription fee, which is not to say that it doesn't stack up well to other MMOs. I don't know. I just don't like playing subscription fees for games. I don't want to have to put in a certain number of hours to justify what I've spent. I want to be able to play whenever I feel like it, not necessarily according to a paid schedule.
You've done what you came to do.
So it's just it would take a lot to convince me to put in to pay a subscription fee, and this game didn't really manage to do that. But it is good. I would pay $60 for this. Probably, because of the multiplayer options. If this was a single-player game, I probably would have spent $60.
Going to be fine. We're just very worried about the poor victims in some cases.
But we'll see how it goes. I am very curious. I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have to say.
Over here, quickly.
Yeah, I would. If you are a big fan of MMOs, I would imagine that there's got to be some kind of starter deal that you can get on this game. And I would probably say, if you enjoy MMOs, you should be willing to give this a shot. The one thing that I did consistently hear about it was that it was not Elder Scrolls enough for purists and not MMO enough for MMO fans. That might be true. I don't know, because I haven't played a lot of MMOs. This felt like Elder Scrolls to me. It is a little bit bare bones, but I assume that that will change over time as they add more content. And with more content, I think this will be a laudable and worthy game. And I may end up subscribing to it if they add more stuff and fix more things. It's possible. It could be the very first game I ever subscribed to. But we'll see. It won't happen right away. I'll be giving it some time. I'll wait. Anyway, I'll also throw up a little video of the celebration at the end, but thanks for watching.